Just a day ago, Putin held this end-of-the-year Q&A session that was almost 4.5 hours long. In this live session, Russian people and Russian journalists got to ask him any question they wanted, and this included foreign journalists that were in Russia. So, I watched the whole thing, and it doesn't seem like it was scripted because some of the questions were actually super straightforward and tough. And it does seem like Putin made a few mistakes answering, especially considering this was a 4.5-hour-long program, and he did all this in one sitting. So you're bound to slip up here and there. Now, we'll go over all the highlights, but first and foremost, as you guys noticed in the title, there was one question that was deleted from the official Russian website. This website that they have for the president of Russia, where the Kremlin publish anything Putin does, means calling another state leader, meeting with just Russian officials, meeting the soldiers, anything he does. They publish everything here in its entirety. So I looked at this whole thing, and there was one question that was missing, and that was the question where it seemed like Putin kind of lost his cool, because a BBC journalist asked him a question about how he's been ruling Russia for the past 25 years, and how it compares to Boris Yeltsin, who was the president before him. So let's listen to this.
BBC News.
Exactly 25 years ago, Boris Yeltsin resigned, handed you power, and told you to take care of Russia. Some 25 years later, do you think you've taken care of Russia? Because looking in, what do we see? We see substantial losses in the so-called special military operation that you declared. We see Ukrainian soldiers in the Kursk region. You criticize the NATO expansion, but there is now more NATO on Russia's borders. Sweden and Finland, sanctions, high inflation, and demographic problems. Do you think you've taken care of your country?
Yes, and I think I haven't just taken care of it, I think we've pulled back from the edge of the abyss. Because with everything that was happening to Russia before that, we were heading towards a complete total loss of our sovereignty. And without sovereignty, Russia cannot exist as an independent state. Let me draw your attention to what you said about Boris Yeltsin. Everything was okay. They patronizingly patted him on the shoulder. They turned a blind eye when he drank. He has welcome in all Western circles. The second he raised his voice in support of Yugoslavia, the moment he said that it contradicted the international law and the UN Charter, as soon as he said it was unacceptable in modern Europe to strike Belgrade, a European capital, without the sanction of the UN Security Council, they immediately started having a go at him, call him names, say he's a drunk, and so on. Don't you remember that? I have done everything so that Russia can be an independent sovereign state that is capable of taking decisions in its own interests, not in the interests of countries that were dragging it towards them, patting you on the shoulder so they can use you for their own purposes. I could stop there. I know you've reeled off a string of things that seem to reinforce your arguments. You said about inflation. Yes, there's inflation. We're going to fight it. But we have economic growth. We are ranked 4th in the world in terms of purchasing power parity. Please tell your readers that. 1st place in Europe, way ahead of Great Britain. I don't think Great Britain is even in the top 5. We're prepared to work with Great Britain, and if Great Britain wants to work with us. But if it doesn't happen, we'll cope without our former allies in the anti-Hitler coalition.
Now, it's pretty clear that Putin was super angry over this question, which is why the question was excluded from the official president of Russia's website. And not only this question, there were several other questions asked by foreign journalists that Putin did not like. Here's another one from American journalist Keir Simmons of NBC News. So let's listen to this.
Mr. President, you have failed to reach the objectives of your special military operation. Large numbers of Russians have died, including a general assassinated here in Moscow this week. And the leader of Syria, who you supported, has been overthrown. Mr. President, when you face President-elect Trump, you will be the weaker leader. How do you propose to compromise? What are you going to offer?
You asked what we can offer, or I can offer to the President-elect Trump when we meet. I do not know when we are going to meet because he does not speak about that. I haven't spoken to him in more than 4 years now. You said that this conversation will take place where I'll be in a weakened state. Dear colleague, well, I'm saying dear and distinguished colleague, because though despite all persecutions of our media, the Russian media, you are allowed to work here freely. Isn't that good already? To you and to the people who pay your salary in the United States would really like for Russia to be in a weakened state? I'm of a different opinion. I think that Russia became much stronger over the past 2 or 3 years. Why? Because we are becoming a truly sovereign country. And we barely depend on anybody. We are capable of firmly standing on our feet when it comes to the economy. I have already talked about economic growth rates. We are strengthening our defense capability. The combat readiness of the Russian armed forces is the highest in the world today. I assure you it is the highest. The same is true of our defense industry. We are increasing the production of everything our Army and Navy need now and will need in the future. We are doing so confidently and quickly, unlike our opponents. I have already spoken about the successes of our armed forces, which are due in large measure to production growth in the defense industry of the Russian Federation. As I have said, we are doing this confidently and quite rationally. It has been said that our forces are advancing along the front line. One explanation for this is the existence of the equipment I have mentioned. Yes, in fact, all NATO countries are fighting against us. We spoke about our inflation, and what is the situation over there? Take a 155mm shell, which cost 2,000 euros 2 years ago, and now costs 4 times more, 8,000 euros. If this trend persists, 2% of GDP spending on defense in NATO countries, which President-elect Donald Trump always insisted on, will not suffice. Even 3% will not be enough. The training and combat standards and the morale of the Russian armed forces are higher than those of any other army in the world. That is why I believe that Russia has largely achieved the state we wanted to achieve. It has grown stronger and become a truly sovereign state, and we will make decisions without looking at other people's opinions, only with our national interests in mind. You have mentioned Syria. You and, as I said, those who pay your salary would like to present the current developments in Syria as Russia's defeat. I assure you that this is not the case, and here is why. We came to Syria 10 years ago to prevent the creation of a terrorist enclave there, like the one that we saw in some other countries, for example, Afghanistan. We have achieved that goal, by and large. Even the groups that were fighting against the Assad regime and the government forces back then have undergone internal changes. It is not surprising that many European countries and the United States are trying to develop relations with them now. Would they be doing this if they were terrorist organizations? This means that they have changed, doesn't it? So our goal has been achieved to a certain degree. Next, we did not deploy any ground forces in Syria. They simply were not present there. Our presence consisted solely of 2 bases, an air base and a naval base. The ground operations were conducted by the Syrian armed forces and, as is widely known, there is no secret here, certain pro-Iranian combat units. At one point, we even withdrew our special operations forces from the area. We were not engaged in combat there. So what transpired? When armed opposition groups advanced towards Aleppo, the city was defended by approximately 30,000 personnel. However, when 350 militants entered the city, the government forces, along with the pro-Iranian units, withdrew without resistance, demolishing their positions as they left. This pattern was observed across nearly the entire Syrian territory.
Everyone knows what happened to the Russian forces and Russian bases in Syria. It became an embarrassment for Putin, but Putin cannot tell that to the Russian audience. So what does the Kremlin do? They just redefine what winning means. Many experts have pointed out that this is likely what they'll do in Ukraine if we ever get to negotiations. Another point to highlight is how he said 3% of military spending, which Trump has been pushing on NATO allies, is not enough, especially with inflation. Well, first of all, inflation in Western countries is nearly not as bad in Russia. Putin claims multiple times in this session that Russian inflation is around 9%, which is a complete lie. Many independent studies suggest that inflation is likely as high as 25 to 30%. Kremlin are purposefully underreporting the actual numbers to avoid public unrest against the regime. Another related point is that just the day after Putin made this statement, we have reports from the Financial Times indicating that President Trump's team has reached out to every European NATO member. They're reportedly stating that Trump will demand they spend as much as 5% of their GDP on defense. Now, it's clear that the Trump administration want to support Ukraine, but Trump doesn't want the US to solely carry the burden for other countries, so he's pushing for others to spend more. Now, another embarrassing thing Russia had to do was when the rebels took over the Syrian government. Putin had to ask Turkey, a NATO member, to help Russia evacuate the Russian troops out of Syria. Now that's super embarrassing, and that's how bad the Russian situation has become. They had to literally ask NATO for help. But anyway, moving on. Next, I have a clip that actually got a reaction from President Zelensky himself. He was listening to this event live, and he tweeted when Putin talked about the Orshnik missile. First watch the clip, and then we'll get into President Zelensky's reaction.
I cannot but ask you about the statements that we have heard over the past few weeks concerning the footage of the first combat tests of the latest Oreshnik missile, which has been shown all over the world. One gets the impression that it really has no drawbacks, but the West continues to refer to Oreshnik as a modification of old Soviet weapons, claiming that this missile can be shot down by air defense even at the launch stage. How would you comment on this? Does it have any shortcomings? If you do not mind, I have a clarifying question. What meaning did the creators of the Oreshnik put into the name Hazel Tree? There are several versions.
It is a modern, a brand new weapon. All new achievements in any sphere are based on the designs and achievements made in the past, which people use to move forward. This is also true about the Oreshnik system. Yes, it is based on previous designs, but these designs were made in the contemporary Russian period. Our scientists, designers, and engineers use that basis to create something new, coordinating their activities with the Defense Ministry as the contractor. When I was ultimately informed about that system, I joined the discussions on whether to make it or not, in what quantities, when and how. It is a new system. As I have said, it is an intermediate and shorter range system. You have said that some Western experts believe that this missile can be easily shot down and destroyed, especially in the boost phase of the missile trajectory. What would I tell those experts? There are several types of air defense systems, as you know, being from the Zvezda TV channel, such as Patriot and the more modern THAAD systems. I do not know if Ukraine has them, but I do not think so. If the Americans want, they can send its THAAD systems to Ukraine. These are more modern systems, similar to our S-400 systems. The Patriot systems are comparable to our S-300s, while THAAD is similar to our S-400 systems, if only slightly inferior. Let them send these systems to Ukraine, and we will ask our people in Ukraine to tell us about the modern solutions of these systems which we could use. I am not joking when I say our people, because there are people in Ukraine who you can talk to. There are many of such people who are dreaming, together with us, about liberating their country from the neo-Nazi regime. There are also other strike systems, such as the ballistic missile system, BMD, which used to be a hot topic of our discussions. We once asked the Americans not to deploy that system, so that we would not have to create weapons that would be able to avoid it. We have eventually done that. We have created the Avangard glide vehicle, which does not fly by a specific trajectory, but hugs the terrain without going up into space because it is not a ballistic missile. We have done a great deal to evade air defense systems. Overall, this whole story is an expensive product for the American taxpayers that can do little to ensure national security. However, that system has been created and produced in large quantities. 2 missile launching areas have been established in Romania and Poland, respectively. Around 24 missile interceptors are already deployed at each site. I don't remember, but I think they are called Standard Missile 3 systems. Standard Missile 3 Block 1B missiles are deployed in Romania. They have an effective range of 300 kilometers and can hit targets 80 to 250 kilometers above the ground. Even more formidable weapon systems are deployed in Poland, with a range and altitude of 1,500 kilometers. However, our medium-range Oreshnik missile system can strike targets located 1,000, 1,500, 3,000 plus, and up to 5,500 kilometers away. Such is its range. Supposing our system is located 2,000 kilometers away, the missile interceptors on Polish territory would be unable to hit it. Yes, they say that the missiles are quite vulnerable during the initial boost phase. First, nothing will reach those missile bases, even if they are unprotected. And of course, we are shielding them. Nothing can hit them. There are no systems capable of reaching these bases. Second, it takes time to travel this distance, while our missile needs a few seconds to start dispensing warheads. And that's it. The ship has sailed. There is almost no chance of shooting down these missiles. If the Western experts you mentioned think otherwise, they should suggest to those in the West and the United States who are paying them for their analytical services to conduct a certain technological experiment, a high-tech 21st century duel. Let them choose a target in Kiev, deploy all their air defense and missile defense forces there, and we will hit that target using an Oreshnik missile. We shall see what happens. We are ready to conduct this experiment. Is the other side ready? In any event, we do not rule this out. What I want to say is that all of their air defense and ABM systems are operating. I am telling you what engineers, scientists, and military specialists are telling me. They are also telling some things at the level of the U.S. political leadership. Let us hold this experiment, this technological duel, and see what happens. This would be interesting, and I believe it would be useful for both us and the U.S. side.
Now, right when President Putin threatened NATO with the Oreshnik missile, Zelensky made a tweet in Ukrainian. He said, "People are dying, and he thinks it's interesting," in quotes. Dumbass. Now, talking about the Oreshnik missile, all pro-Russian media outlets are basically making it out to be something that's much bigger than a nuclear weapon, something that just changes the course of warfare as we know it. The Russian media is basically hyping it to be a weapon that is so great that Russia would beat anybody that wants to challenge it in a fight, when in reality, that's far from the truth. If you're someone who understands global politics, you know that Russia is really good at information warfare. Something Russia isn't good at is making modern equipment that can make an impact on the battlefield. That's why they're using the tactic of disinformation campaigns, where they hype up their weapon systems and make a deterrence against the Western nations. That's the kind of warfare that they're still fighting in 2024. Here, listen to Keir Giles talk about how big of a weapon Oreshnik really is.
On the Oreshnik missile, he suggested a technological duel in Kyiv to test whether the weapon can be stopped by its air and missile defense systems.
It's nice and easy for Putin to suggest things that look like a challenge to the West and a challenge that will never be accepted or responded to because it's ridiculous. But Putin has been working very hard, along with the rest of the Russian information warfare apparatus, to keep the idea of this Oreshnik as a wonder weapon in the world's media and in front of people when they're considering Russia's options for escalation.
And the reality is?
And the reality is they have very few of them, we're told. They're not able to mass produce them, and it's not at all clear what challenge this actually really does pose either to Ukraine or to the West more broadly.
Russia's goals in Ukraine. He says Russia has succeeded and moved away from the brink of the abyss. He's done everything for Russia's sovereignty.
Again, Putin has to pretend that what he's doing is a success, because otherwise it would be an admission that all of the lives that have been lost in Russia were for nothing. And of course, the central part of the mythology is that by invading Ukraine, he rescued Russia from an impending catastrophe. He has to stick to that story because it's the only way he can justify everything that's going on in Russia today.